What if the key to unlocking healthy longevity isn't just in our DNA, but in the cities we live in, the communities we build, the data we share? Imagine a world where your neighborhood, your local clinic, even your favorite park become living laboratories for understanding aging. That's exactly what today's guest is helping to create. Hey everyone, welcome back to Decoding Longevity. I'm your host Raghav Sehgal, joined by my co-host Macsue.
Hi, everyone. In our last episode, we have explored how cellular rejuvenation might one day reset our biological clocks. Today, we are zooming out, way out, to explore how environments, lifestyles, and social systems shape how we age. Our guest today is Tina Woods, a longevity pioneer, CEO of Collider Health, and co founder of the All Party Parliament and Group Longevity in the UK. So she's also a leading voice in what's been called the exposome revolution, a movement to map how everything we're exposed to across life affects our aging trajectory. Tina, it's such a pleasure to have you here. Welcome to our podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Very good to be here.
So let's start with the basics, Tina. So the
Yeah.
paper you led, cities, communities, and clinics can be test beds for human exposome and aging research, introduces sort of this big idea of the human exposome. For listeners who may not be familiar with this idea, what exactly does exposome really mean, and why is it becoming so important in the context of aging research?
Sure. So just the formal sort of definition first of what the exposome is. So really the exposome describes the totality of environmental exposures, external stresses that impact us as individuals across our lifetime. So that's everything, and it's, in all the areas where we live, work, and play. And so that's everything from air pollution, air quality, noise pollution, access to green spaces. It's the food that we eat, our activity levels, the classic kind of occupational hazards, environmental toxins. I mean, things like microplastics are now becoming more and more, I guess, acknowledged as particular threats, for example. But more and more, it's actually the kind of the stresses, sort of psychosocial stress, our despair over the
Yeah.
state of the world, our social connections, loneliness being an even bigger killer being recognized than even smoking. So these are all exposome factors that are really hitting human health, resilience, and flourishing, as I sort of often describe it. And what we've discovered, I studied genetics a very, very long time ago, and when I graduated, it was when the Human Genome Project was just kicking off. Now, this is a while ago, but I was really excited about that. And of course, it was a monumental effort to decode the human DNA. And of course, it's led to many, many discoveries about health and disease. But actually, more than anything, it basically showed that really our genetics is a relatively small proportion of the determinants of our health. It's actually how our genetics are impacted by the exposome. So the 90% of our diseases are actually caused by exposomic factors, environmental exposure. So this is actually the new big kind of frontier of longevity, as I often describe it, because it's not just the inside that we have to understand, which has been the focus of a lot of the sort of longevity science, hallmarks of aging, etc. And really, it is about understanding these wider effects. And so the evidence is really sort of stacking up. So we now have the technologies. We've got quantum sensing, systems biology. We've got obviously the new sort of AI hitting us. We've now reached a time to actually really understand at an individual level what is really impacting our health. And we know that the holy grail of longevity science is actually understanding the N equals 1. What is really happening to us as unique individuals that we are, unique biology, our unique genetics? It has everything to do with the totality of all these exposures across our lifetime, from pre-birth even. But the legacy of our parents' lifestyle actually carries through epigenetically. So even pre-birth and of course right through to our death, these are actually really, really where it's at in terms of the understanding that we must apply to longevity science and medicine.
Yeah, that is such a powerful concept because it really does zoom out from, the genes, as you said, and, all of this big omics that we constantly talk and, all of these things that we constantly interviewing people about it. So I love it. But your paper also mentions that cities and communities themselves can become test beds for longevity research. Could you maybe paint a little bit more of a picture on how do you see this happening and how is this potentially working in the future?
Absolutely. So I started talking about the exposome as a sort of scientific framework for really describing what the human environments are like and how we can support human health through these environments. So that was sort of 4 or 5 years ago. And a paper we got published in the Lancet, Healthy Longevity, about 5 years ago. And it was describing the context of a program that I have been very involved with the National Innovation Centre for Aging in Newcastle in the UK, our City of Longevity program, which is an international effort around the world. How do we create cities for health, right? And so a lot of my work has been really been around that. And then last year for X Prize, I sit on the X Prize Moonshot Committee. I pitched the idea of the Human Exposome Project as a future moonshot to complement the X Prize for Health Span, which is actually underway. And you can see from the way that I described exposome be a really neat complement to that. Now, it didn't get through to the finals for X Prize, but actually got a lot of attention. And actually, the Nature Medicine paper that you referred to was published in March of this year, which described how our environments, our localities, the places where we live. So whether you want to start at a sort of community level, a sort of a city level, or even indeed, for example, clinics in our cities, these are all natural places, almost like living laboratories where people are getting access to, are trying to get support with their health. And actually these create the environments in which we can actually look at creating these test beds with the Human Exposome Project. So fast forward a couple of months, I was actually invited to sit on the steering committee for the Human Exposome Project Moonshot that kicked off in May in Washington, DC this year. So all the stars were starting to align. And so of course I was delighted, and I could see that it had some backing from Bloomberg. It had the weight of a number of heavyweight academic institutions behind it, Johns Hopkins, Columbia. Of course, Columbia is doing a lot of work on exposome, and of course many other organizations around the world. So I spoke on partnerships, public-private sector partnerships. How do we create these sort of what we need are the regional sort of the regional sort of test beds. Looking at actually what is happening in the real world of people, that we can then sort of act as a bridge to a sort of a global governance sort of roadmap and the structure and the data infrastructure and the governance piece. With the Human Exposome Moonshot that is kicking off, and of course it has another meeting in April. I'm going to be very involved in that. And so we kind of reached a point in time when we actually know and have the sort of the resource and the infrastructure, now this momentum building up, where really the time is now for the Human Exposome Project. So just going back to the paper, it sort of signaled how we might do that. So of course, in the months that I've been working with the global moonshot team on this, I've been actually working and speaking to people around the world: Costa Rica, Island of Jersey, UAE. I was just at the Dubai Future Forum last week, getting a number of stakeholders really excited about the opportunity that the Human Exposome Project sort of yields for them. And the way that I see longevity evolving, I think this is where I think longevity is going to become so much bigger in terms of the marketplace and the commercial, but also the societal impact perspective. Because I'm speaking, and of course we've got the bioscience community and the sort of the biotech sort of community, which has been very, very active, obviously, for years. But now I'm speaking to property developers, commercial real estate. I'm speaking to hotels, hospitality, retail, consumer brands. They're all seeing longevity as an opportunity for them, and it's all articulated, if you're taking the science-backed approach, through the concept of the exposome. Air quality, sleep quality, nutrition. This is all in the domain of retreats, hotels, spas, and of course, big brands are sort of, redefining, what they mean in this context of health and wellness, where we've seen huge increases in consumer demand and spending in this space, because people have recognized, especially post-COVID, that health is our most precious asset, and so they are prepared to spend. And of course, so really what I predict, and of course all my conversations are around this, is all the industry verticals that are all recognizing that they are also involved in longevity. Exposome describes the scientific underpinning of this. We have a whole language issue that we need to address, because longevity at the moment means different things to different people. But really, the way that I see longevity, it is in the context of the exosome. It's moving upstream in health prevention. We know we need to invest more in prevention. We know that health is completely linked to economic individual wealth, but of course, wider economic prosperity of nations. And so the burning platform has really arrived. And so I predict longevity is going to be much bigger than it is. We're going to see the consumer, the citizen, getting much more behind this, because they will begin to understand what it actually means to them as individuals, and also their role to actually have a more collective responsibility. And this is where governments and where big institutional investment have a role to play, saying, hang on a second, we've got the obesity crisis driven by food companies that are making us eat too much ultra-high processed food. we've got to tackle that. And so these are all the big things that I hope from a system change perspective will be accelerated and augmented by the evidence and data generation that we're going to get off the Human Exposome Project. So this is the big stuff that I think is really exciting and is absolutely needed today to make sure that the science and technology of longevity doesn't just hit the people, reach the people who can afford it, which, there's been lots of
Yeah.
criticism around that. It absolutely needs to hit the mainstream. It needs to reach more people, and it needs to be democratized access to all that
Yeah.
wonderful science and technology. Health equity is a huge thing that I hold dear in the whole way that I do my work, and I'm very, very passionate about that.
Yeah. I have to say, Tina, what is really, really inspirational about your work is how you're sort of structuring it in an approach where this is equitable for
Mm.
everyone, right? The way the Human Exposome Project and the work around it will like impact policy is will work at not an individualized level, right? It will impact not an individual person who has the resources to get access to certain medications, but will be available to everyone in the community, which is such a powerful opportunity for governments, for public policy individuals to do this. But that also brings into question a research question
Mm.
almost, right? Which is there's been so much work in the context of the individual level analysis, right, that has been done in the context of sort of these methylation level data, these
Yep.
sort of inflammation,
Yep.
epigenetic aging. How do you sort of think about sort of linking sort of these population level insights that you are sort of building with the Human Exposome Project to these individual level insights that have already been generated in this context of aging?
So the beauty about the Human Exposome Project is that you get both, because the real opportunity is actually we are collecting data on the individual. And we have to collect the data on the
Mhm.
individual, because to be able to make that, to link the understanding of how we're impacted inside, internally, our biology, our genetics, you actually need to actually get that data at an individual level. So that's the opportunity here. And that's actually why X Prize were interested, because they could see the commercial opportunity to develop the next generation products and services that will be able to collect that data on individuals. And of course, once you have the data, aggregate it up, and then once you actually linking with some of the very powerful sort of new thinking in data. So for example, in the UK, and one of my test beds actually, the island of Jersey, we're looking at the whole concept of linking and identification and verification of data, linking data sets across our lifetimes through the use of personal data wallets, for example, where people have access to data through easy consent mechanisms, can share their data with third parties, third-party organizations, and of course government. And what that allows us to do is actually turn the whole kind of classic big tech model on its head, saying, hang on a second, this data belongs to the individual. And we now have the mechanisms for them to share their data freely. And individuals are very keen on sharing their data, obviously for their own benefit, but also for societal benefit, for wider societal good, kind of like the public good argument for nations. And actually, once you actually create those means in a way of incentivizing and motivating people to do that, you can then build those sort of nudges and reward mechanisms in next generation products and services where everyone has something to win by having access to that data at an individual level, and actually making sure that the insights off that data benefit the individual, but of course spur on the development of all these products and services. And that's when things like insurance, collapsing life and health insurance, and new investment propositions are so interesting. So, but it all comes down to having the means to link through, through individual IDs, etc. Those data sets across our lives that give us the patterns of actually how we're living and what we're doing, and then using nudges and behavioral strategies to actually encourage healthier behaviors, which in the end will benefit us, make us healthier, wealthier, and of course, aggregate that means all, at a population level, at a national level, we all benefit from that. So that's the new kind of stuff that we're looking at. And of course, the island of Jersey, which is fascinating, they have a data trust they've already developed. They already have a mechanism for citizens to consent to the use of their data from all sorts of different data sources. They also have some really interesting, nifty innovation in the finance world that they can bring to the health domain. And they have an island, very socioeconomically diverse. And so they're ready to go, so to speak. And so I think there's a little bit of FOMO that we need in all of this to kind of look at new models, show what works and what could be really exciting, so that we don't keep on getting entrenched which we do, we get paralyzed through all the perverse incentives, the barriers to change, vested interests. These are all the things that we hopefully can dismantle through big thinking, big data collection. So I say the Human Exposome Project ticks off individual plus collective good, and the N equals 1, which is the domain of longevity science, the domain of clinics, the domain of all the scientists that are working. How can we do this? The N equals 1 is absolutely where it is at, but we can find a way to make sure that we can share the benefits of that equitably, fairly, justly to everyone if we get the mechanisms right, the incentives right, and the structures right.
Yeah, it is beautiful what you're building. It's so comprehensive and it's linking the science, the molecular biology with the test beds and the trust from the people
Yep.
to actually put their data and describe their environments, describe what they're doing. So it is quite incredible. But, you know, we also know that you also involved in politics. And I guess that is the almost like the missing piece to bring it all together, because you really have to change the policy from all of the studies. And how do you see this happening, and what is your perspective and plan to get it all to get us there?
So obviously all the political systems, social contexts are all different around the world. I've been doing some really interesting work in the UK context. I mean, the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Longevity, I was involved for 4 years. It disbanded about 3 years ago, but I learned a lot about policy making when I was very involved in that group. And of course, you have to speak the language of politicians and policymakers. And I think right now, the language that really resonates, and of course, you really can't get away from that, is the health equals wealth argument. I mean, once you have the socioeconomic case and the data to show and the evidence to show that actually health needs to be seen as an asset. Prevention is hard because you need a long time to show that it works. And then, of course, you've got things like biomarkers as proxies for trials and all that sort of that stuff that we can look at shortening that cycle to show the return on investment in prevention. But I think actually, and we now, and this again is the power of the Human Exposome Project, once you can actually demonstrate the case to show that prevention pays. And I have to say, I travel a lot around the world. If you go to the Middle East, they've been hit by climate. And of course, human and planetary health is completely interconnected, which of course is very much at the heart of the Human Exposome Project. Air quality, food systems, less reliance on cars. I mean, it's absolutely fundamental to planetary health, which of course is absolutely essential that we tackle. So you go to the Middle East, climate change, you immediately affect it. You go to Delhi, air pollution. These are nations that can clearly see the argument for the exposome. They've done the numbers. You keep a person at the age of 65 who's healthy is probably, and still productive and producing and work and looking after their families, they're probably the most productive citizen you will ever have at the age of 65. So why not use all that longevity knowledge and science and technology to push that to 85 and beyond? So you keep healthy for as long as possible. You get a much bigger bang for your buck than you do when you basically leave it too late till you need to get fixed, which is unfortunately the model that we still have in the US and the UK and most of the westernized world. It just is ridiculous to keep going that way. It doesn't make any sense societally, economically, for individuals, for families, for societies. It absolutely must change. So that goes without saying. So I think so this is where the island of Jersey is quite interesting. They can make their own rules. And this is why, different, self-sovereign sort of states, where they can make their own kind of rules. It's very, very exciting because you can then, you can be agile. You can actually devise ways in which you can be much more effective at rule making, government making, policy making that really benefits, the citizen, the wider population. Health economic argument stacks up. So this is the exciting opportunity, I think, working with different regions around the world. So that's the opportunity. And I think, again, speaking the language, the health economic argument is obviously huge, but I think, we need a different way of valuing what's important to people, but also to society. And I think we're seeing how closely health is connected to wealth. I think we kind of need some new metrics for deciding on success. So this is the big kind of societal questions that I think nations need to be asking, what is really important to humans? It's not just money. GDP on its own should not necessarily be the only measure of national success. We need other factors. This is where hope, joy, our whole sort of psychological state, our need for hope is so important. And these are often discounted in all the decision making, So anyway.
Yeah. I remember this sort of maybe going into a tangent, but I think it's maybe the country of Bhutan that has sort of gross domestic happiness index as one of their metrics, and it's doing really well as a country. The people are happy. They measure it as a way to. And Tina, you can maybe talk more about this. And that actually sort of brings me to my follow-up question: that what does a future city look like, a future longevity city look like, which is sort of well designed for a good exposome, for good health of its people? Say, in 10 years from now, we're in 2035, and you've been given all the resources, Tina, to design the city. What would it look like, in your opinion?
So I think you have to factor in, it absolutely must not just be the metrics that we're currently measuring the success of our nations and our cities. So I think we need to factor in some sort of well-being, quality of life, happiness sort of metric in that, because it's kind of like we can't really ignore it, because we're seeing how social disconnection, especially in this world of digital and AI,
Yeah.
loneliness is actually the biggest killer of all. And we're seeing a growing problem in our younger populations of despair and loneliness and digital disconnection because of the digital world that we live in, because we are sitting behind screens too much. We don't meet people in real life enough. So that quality of human connection is becoming more and more of a discussion point. And now, of course, we're seeing the data mount about how important that is. So I think we have to factor in the areas that actually really matter most to humans, to humanity. And that will also protect us against some of the dangers, I think, of this world of, generative AI and AI agents and all this sort of stuff that's really going to be hitting us, where we could go one of two ways. It could actually demolish our humanity and destroy us, or it could augment our humanity. But we have to build in the design of our cities, what actually will enable us to flourish and thrive. And this is where, again, the exposome is so interesting, because it is exactly those things: having nature around us, access to green spaces, having clean air. It's about kind of going back to the old way that we used to do things. And the westernized model of convenience is actually not really helping us, as we're finding. Too much, ultra high processed food, social media, the clickbait stuff, the reliance on cars. We actually need almost a simpler way of life. I mean, everyone will have heard of the blue zones now. They've been kind of, are they scientific, and robust? Well, I would say the Human Exposome Project, it's kind of like a measurable blue zone project, really. It's kind of like going back to the way that we used to live. Periods of starvation almost. We talk about intermittent fasting and food, caloric restriction. Well, in the old days, we had to worry about where we got our food, hunter-gatherers. I mean, it was kind of built in the whole way that we used to live, right? So it's kind of like we do actually have to go back to what actually were sort of good for us in a funny sort of way. So, but I would say, so it kind of goes back. So the things that the blue zones have spotlighted. Ikigai, the Japanese word for meaning and purpose. Absolutely, we have to find meaning in our lives. And that's about connection, being socially, having close-knit communities, being loved and wanting and giving love back. Fundamental to this. Good food, fresh air, access to nature. It's all those simple things actually that are most important to humans. So we need to kind of go back and now we've got all this fancy technology. We're going to reprove what we kind of know, what our grandmothers have been telling us for generations. We're going back to ancient rituals and rites. I mean, I run this thing called Longevity Rave. It is literally the power of getting people together, dance, music, the rhythm of the beat, all this sort of stuff, the power that you get when you're in this energy field with people around you. These are the things that's us as being human beings. We've got to respect that, value that. We can measure it now, but let's put it back into the real kind of work of policy making, investment decisions, the whole way that we think about the future, and don't destroy our humanity with all this technology. Help us augment our humanity, not destroy it, I would say.
Yeah. Well, I don't know
Yeah.
about anything else, but I'm definitely signed up for a longevity rave. I'm kidding.
Yeah. Well, you're gonna be in San Francisco next week, so we're doing it. You should come.
Right, we're going to get an invite straight after
Yeah,
this. We're doing a whole science on human connection, so this will be the
I
joys
love it.
of it.
Yeah, I'm saying I never thought that my two passions, dancing and music, would come together with the actually work. I was like, oh my gosh, this cannot get any better. It's just Yeah, it's incredible. Tina, thank you so much. This has been like such a great conversation, like going from genes to communities, how we're shifting from clinics to really have bringing back this connection of, humanity really. So it's super exciting. I can't wait, to kick this off with you and to actually be working and seeing what this Exposome project really brings about. It's going to be incredible. So thank you so much for coming in the podcast and sharing a little bit about it. And
Thank you for letting me share with
And
you.
to all our listeners, we link Tina's paper and her work with Collider Health and the All Party Parliamentary Group for Longevity in the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow, share, and leave us a review. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Decoding Longevity.